And so it was decreed that each year, the 12 districts of Pan Am shall offer up in tribute one young man and woman between the ages of 12 and 18 to be trained in the art of survival and to be prepared.
A couple of weeks ago, I did a blog about the cutting of the Hunger Games here in the UK to get a 12A certificate. So I said, well, what do you think? Do you think it's a marketing issue, or do you think it's a censorship issue? A huge number of responses from both sides of the fences. Here are just a few of them. Many of you had seen the film, some of you liked it, some of you didn't so much, but here's just a smidgen of your responses to the censorship issue. This from Dominic Barlow. I've not seen the Hunger Games yet, but I believe in principle that the recutting that's taken place here and in other films are an entirely valid part of the filmmaking process. In the case of large-scale movie production, it is unnecessary, foolhardy even, to treat art and commerce as antitheses of each other. Yes, artistic integrity is important, but so is the obligation to see that the millions of budget dollars are being used responsibly. Someone note this from Mecha Godzilla. Cutting of the scenes was a very shrewd decision by the studio to reach a larger audience, i.e. the target audience. The Hunger Games is considered to be a young adult piece of fiction, which usually ends up meaning young teens and preteens. A 15 rating would have alienated a large chunk of the target audience who may have been hotly anticipating the film. The violence may be less explicit, but we're still talking about a world where children are pitted against each other to the death. A softened kill shot doesn't change the film's grim subject matter. And this from ENSJ. As the father of an 11-year-old girl who's a strong reader and has read and loves the books, I was very pleased that the distributors/marketers did this. If the film had got a 15, then she would not have been able to see it. End of. On a side note, I really rather enjoyed it. So that's one side of the debate. An equal number of you, however, wrote in arguing the other side of the debate. This, for example, from Graham. Marketing decisions or not, it's self-censorship, pure and simple. It can't be seen any other way. Whether it's justified or not is another thing, but it's censorship however you look at it. Personally, I'm disappointed that it's been slightly watered down for marketing purposes in the UK, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the film should be condemned or shunned in its censored state. Marcuse Muse, however, says, I know you're a big fan of the BBFC, Mark, at least you are nowadays, but this recent trend of demanding cuts is a slippery slope to a censorship disaster. As far as I'm concerned, when someone outside the UK, e.g. an American, asks me if I've seen the Hunger Games or the Woman in Black, I have to reply no, despite having supposedly seen something like them in the cinema. Film is a subtle art. Even the smallest cut can have the greatest impact on the whole piece. Ask any editor. So us Brits now have not seen the same movie, the proper movie, and you can't blame the studios for this. If the BBFC effectively state, cut this, this and this, or you won't be making as much money in this territory, of course they're going to comply. It's on the BBFC's head, and they should really reconsider their ways of late. I mean, I would just like to add to that, on the subject of censorship, you look at what somebody like Jafar Panahi has been up against, being banned from making films and making the movie This Is Not a Film. To me, that's censorship. I still see this as marketing, but two people there very coherently arguing that this is indeed the thin end of the censorship wedge. Now, despite that strong disagreement which ran throughout your responses to the blog, there was one area in which there seemed to be a broad consensus agreement. This from Juliet. I don't really mind alterations being made so it can reach a wider audience, but it'd be nice to have the option of seeing the full version, a 12A version and a 15 version, just like you can see 2D and 3D. And Mr. Jim Jam, don't see why they can't just do two cuts, one for afternoon showings and one for evening showings. This put me in mind of the fact that several years ago, when Saturday Night Fever was first released with an adults-only classification, it became a huge hit. Kids wanted to see it, so they recut it and did a toned-down version that the younger audiences could see. The same with Passion of the Christ. So there is a precedent for it. I can't think of a precedent of two versions being released simultaneously, although maybe there is one. If you can think of one, let me know. I'll finish with this from Street RW. The BBFC is certainly not to blame. If the studio wanted a 12A rating, they should have submitted a 12A film. He goes on to say, there is a story that the distributors wanted a AA rating that was over 14s for The Deer Hunter and asked the BBFC for advice on what they should cut to avoid an X. And the BBFC responded that the film was a magnificent film and the studio had a moral duty not to interfere with it by cutting it. On a final note, as you probably know, there's a new BFI DVD release of The Devils, Ken Russell's masterpiece from the 1970s, which has been issued in its original X-rated cut, but not its extended 2004 recut, which put back in the Rape of Christ sequence. Why is it the X-rated cut, not the director's cut? Well, the answer is that the BBFC, the censors, have no trouble with the longer version, but Warners, who own the film, will not allow the longer version to be released. My feeling is that in the 21st century, the BBFC are more often an ally than a foe in the war on censorship.